Hello and welcome everyone to the second program of the inaugural Global Jewish Fertility Summit. I am Dr. Amy Barron, the founder and executive director of I Was Supposed to Have a Baby and your host for this evening. In our first session today, we talked a lot about what it's like at the beginning when you first discover that there might be an issue, when you first go in for testing. We went through the experience of getting treatments, followed by financial difficulties, spiritual crises, and we also talked about the experience of choosing third-party reproduction. Finally, we discussed grief, self-care, setting boundaries, and learning how to advocate for yourself. But altogether often, people who write into I Was Supposed to Have a Baby, they tell us about how their community leaders have let them down. They share how they needed support and guidance and felt anything but embraced. They share how their doctors were callous and unfeeling when delivering bad news. They lean on friends and family, hoping for a little bit of a reprieve, but they keep getting asked, so when are you finally going to have kids? You know, your mother's not getting any younger. Or they have neighbors popping out kids right and left and can't seem to get a break from the endless meal trains and baby showers they need to attend. Unfortunately, these stories come to us all too often. And the one thread that links all of these is that it's clear that people want to do the right thing, but they really just don't know how. So our second session here tonight of I Was Supposed to Have a Baby's Global Inaugural Jewish Fertility Summit is therefore dedicated to how we can be better on a communal level. Therefore, instead of focusing on the individual experience, this session will discuss the general, communal, overarching themes of what people need in these difficult moments. Our panels will provide clear ways in which a friend, family, or community can provide a supportive and inclusive environment. Our panels tonight are made up of one PhD, one rabbi, two MDs, two CEOs, two executive directors, and one person who knows everything there is to know about surrogacy. Each of these panelists has dedicated their time to building a better environment for people going through fertility challenges. In fact, they are some of the most prominent voices in the Jewish fertility community today. They will share with you their ideas for prayers, rituals, and programs, communal financial models, ways in which spaces could be more inclusive, and how to increase sensitivity towards those who feel left behind. They will discuss how clergy, community lay leaders, and trusted public figures should speak to people who are struggling and how they might help create an environment of inclusivity, awareness, openness, and support. And finally, in our last panel, we will review what friends and family should and should not say, how people can learn to thrive again, even if they have found themselves with a smaller family than anticipated, or even if they are childless not by choice. As a reminder, we'd like to tell you that there is no room here for theological, geographical, gender-related, or any other differentiation when it comes to fertility challenges. All humans have the potential to suffer here, regardless of where they look, what they look like, where they live, or what they believe in. This summit is for everyone. Finally, just a couple of housekeeping reminders. We chose, this is our number one, we chose this webinar format specifically because we wanted you to be able to have privacy and anonymity, so you could have your screens off and your names hidden. Your participation in this event is 100% anonymous, but you must rename yourself if you want to be that way. Please feel comfortable using the chat, knowing that your identity remains anonymous and your shared experiences will likely be helpful for others to hear. We hope that this makes you feel comfortable participating in the chat's more sensitive prompts with this knowledge in mind. Number 2, all of you will be getting a very detailed resource packet tomorrow evening, along with recordings of both the 12 p.m. and the 8 p.m. programs, which includes the names and contact information for all our speakers, organizations, and sponsors. So if you need to step away for a minute or for any point, have no fear. You won't miss anything. And lastly, before we bring you these conversations, we need to thank our incredible sponsors, and we will be doing that during the course of the program. So firstly, I'd like to thank our platinum sponsor, Mays Laboratories, and here is a video from them.
I am Michael A. Werner, MD. I'm a urologist specializing in male infertility and male and female sexual dysfunction. I'm also the medical director of Mays Laboratories. One of the things I'm proudest of is that in the last 3 years, we brought a new technology from Israel. It is called ESSM, and what it does is looks for sperm in men who have no sperm in the ejaculate on a regular semen analysis, or finds sperm in men who have very low levels. And we have found that in men with no sperm, 50% of the time we can find sperm, and in men who have low levels of sperm, we can find sperm almost 100% of the time. But not only do we find the sperm, but we're able to take them, put them into little wells, and freeze them in a way that, one, allows them to be found quite easily by the embryologists during an IVF cycle, and two, allows them to survive the freeze and thaw process with a very high success rate. In fact, we have one patient who underwent 2 open biopsies and no sperm were found, and then we found sperm in the ejaculate. Thank you for your time, and if you would like more information, please come to our website at mayslabs.com. I'm unbelievably excited about the fact that we have introduced ESSM to this country, and I do think it's going to be the gold standard of care for men with no sperm in the ejaculate or very low numbers.
Okay. Thank you, Mays Laboratories, for being our platinum sponsor. Let's get right into it. We are in our first panel, and I'd like to invite Gila Block, the Executive Director of Yesh Tikva, Alana Frank, the CEO and founder of Jewish Fertility Foundation, and Rabbi David Glickman, Senior Rabbi, Congregation Beth Shalom, and co-founder of Priya. And this panel is entitled, "This Affects All of Us: How Communities Can Show That They Care." So, okay, I'm just going to open this up to all of you. And I really, I like to think of this conversation specifically, this panel, as the meta conversation. And really what I'm interested in here, and what we're all interested in, is how can we make our communal spaces more inclusive? How can communities approach making these changes on a larger scale, but also specifically for their congregants? And then I'm going to even go further and say, we know that there are people that are being left behind. And we know that, they're not having kids at the same rate as some of the other members of our community, as most of the other members of our community. So what would you advise community leaders also, by way of increasing sensitivity for these individuals and for these families so they don't feel that way? Gila, I'm going to come to you first.
Okay, I'm going to apologize in advance. My internet decided right now to be unstable. It hasn't been all day, but now it's unstable. So if you lose me, that's why.
Well, welcome to being on a live program. It's all good.
I've tried 3 different internet sources as I'm sitting here. None of them seem to be stable enough. So I cut out in the middle of your question, but I think that the question that you're referring to is what our communities could do to be more inclusive of those who are in struggle. Okay, so I am going to start by actually thanking our communities, because when I personally went through my fertility journey 10 years ago, inclusive wasn't a word that was being used. vis-a-vis fertility and the Jewish community. And today, the leaps and bounds of inclusivity that have already been met and that we continue to work towards is incredible. And it is in no small part to all the incredible organizations that have been featured here, both this morning and today. This conversation has grown and continues to grow. And I think that that's the first step in being more inclusive, is we just need to talk about it. The more we talk about it, the more we create space for it, and individuals who feel that their community can now talk about it, can now open up and share with those that they feel ready to. So I think that's step number one in this process, is that we need to keep talking about it more often in our communal spaces. A lot of really high frequency family centered holidays, rituals, and spaces.
We might be losing her. Oh, she's back. Or maybe. Okay, Gila, we're going to make a jump, actually. And Alana, I'm going to come to you and let Gila have a chance to stabilize. Gila, we lost you for a second. So I'm gonna let you pause for a moment, and I'm gonna give Alana a chance to speak, and then we'll come back.
Sure, and I will keep that box open for you to talk about work that you're doing in the community setting. I'll focus a little bit more on the legacy organizations that are already set up within America, as well as internationally. You know, organizations like federations, JCCs, community and family foundations have the opportunity to, you know, not only donate their time and energy, but they have resources. And I think, you know, especially what Amy has brought to light is that there are so many amazing organizations and passionate founders and CEOs and such. I think there's a real opportunity to help these organizations do what they do best by funding them. Funding is really, really important and crucial, because obviously money is what goes around, but also utilizing, you know, federations have great resources to get the word out through, you know, communication, through marketing. JF&CS really doing a great job in that way. And I think it's really important because, you know, when some of us started now, like 8 to 10 plus years ago, there wasn't this conversation. And I think now that there are so many people doing this awesome work, we really need that community support nationally and beyond, so we can continue helping people feel, you know, they're not alone during this crazy time.
Absolutely. Rabbi Glickman, you have a particular lens on this because you are a communal rabbi, but you are also the co-founder of Priya. And our next question after this is going to be talking about the financial models, which I'm going to come to you for. But now you sit at the helm of an organization and a community that has lots of different kinds of people. And we all know that when you get a big group of people in a room, we know that 1 to 6 to 1 in 8 of them are struggling. And we know that 1 out of 4 pregnancies ends in a loss. So that is a tremendous number, whether people are sharing that publicly or not. So how do you make your synagogue, how do you make your spaces more inclusive?
Thank you, Amy. Yes, both when Annie and I started Priya about 14 years ago, it was because of this lack of any sort of support or community. And I'm a rabbi at a conservative synagogue, and I think that these types of challenges span across all denominations, Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. And I think that there are nuances to the pain and nuances to the struggle based on the cultural specificity within each of these spaces. I think that there's a few things that can be done. Number one is simply by talking about it, bringing it up as that this is a reality. We come from a tradition of a long line of couples who have had troubles with fertility. So if you just read the book of Genesis, the book of Bereshit, you are going to see couple after couple after couple that had struggles and challenges with having children when they wanted it, when they wanted them, and the way that they wanted them. And so this shouldn't be something that we are afraid or ashamed of talking about now. However, we need to be aware that a lot of our programming is centered around children. And so people who don't have children can feel very excluded. And in liberal denominations, non-Orthodox denominations, oftentimes the impetus for joining a synagogue at all is to do something with your children. There's a much later date for when non-Orthodox Jews join synagogues. And it's usually when their first child is ready for preschool or kindergarten. So that means that if somebody's been struggling with fertility for a number of years, you're pushing off connection with the whole Jewish community for maybe decades. And so I think that it's important for communities to speak openly about it, to have articles in online and in spaces where people who aren't coming to synagogues see the resources that are available. And I agree totally with what Elena said, that federations, foundations, Jewish family services, they need to get behind this in the way they are for so many other physical and mental health struggles. But the communication needs to be beyond just where synagogues are. It needs to be online, on social media, and also to create spaces where people can have social life and community, even if they don't have children with them.
I'm curious, can I add one thing?
Please.
And I don't know, Gila and David, if you guys are seeing this, but we're seeing huge trends in our communities around single moms and dads by choice who are already feeling completely excluded. Like, where is their place, not only in synagogue, but just in life when they're in their late 30s, early 40s, wanting to have a baby. And also the LGBTQ community is really, it's such an interesting time for us as an organization, and just people we're noticing really interesting. We talk about feeling excluded, right? Anyway, I won't go into it, but we just had 2 deaths in Atlanta around just isolation and exclusion, and
I think that it may become eclipsed by the overall epidemic of loneliness that we're seeing post-COVID, that there is an added extra layer of loneliness to people who are struggling or challenged by fertility, and people who are either single, or either are or want to be single parents by choice, who are queer couples and want to find a way to have children either through adoption or surrogacy. It's an extra added layer of loneliness, and we have to be able to speak openly and also celebrate extra hard when those children come, and with no difference in the way that we welcome them with Brit Milah, with a circumcision, with baby namings, with other kinds of rituals, and to treat it, I would say, from a ritual perspective, as we would any other physical or mental illness, whether that means praying with them, putting names on Mishaberach lists. And also for people who are wanting more creative rituals, there are a lot of rituals out there in many websites that it just takes a little bit of Googling and a creative clergy person to be able to find those.
Perfect. So Gila, I want to give you an opportunity. Was there something more before we move on to our next point, which David, I'm going to dovetail onto what you said, but I want to make sure, was there something else that you wanted to share where you got cut off with your connection in regard to this point?
I think it's kind of similar to what Rabbi Glickman was saying, in that we can yes and a lot of spaces. There's a lot of ritual that is focused on family and children, and we can use that as a moment to pause and create space even within that for those who are struggling. And being able to own the reality that our Jewish community might be very heavily focused around whatever a family unit looks like in that community, and we can also make space for everyone else within that. And I think that that's a space that we really need to work hard on. And I think that that's what I'm hearing from everyone here is that how do we yes and it?
Okay, so that's actually leads me directly into my next point, which is that yesh tikva, purposely, your organization purposely and very specifically has designed specific rituals around these different communal events, practices, where it tends to be completely focused on children, to try to make them more inclusive, to try to make it feel easier and a little bit more comfortable for those who don't have. Can you speak to us a little bit about the kinds of things that you've created?
Definitely. And hopefully this new internet connection is a little more stable. We've created a few rituals. I think the ones that I am most proud of and the ones that we have seen create the most change are the fertility prayer, which is a prayer. Most prayers that are written of fertility are inward looking. God bless me with a child. And there were no prayers that looked outwards as a communal experience of expression of God bless them. I'm holding space for them. I'm thinking of the other who is in struggle, not just myself in this moment. And it brings that awareness in that moment of a Brit Milah, of a baby girl experience of celebration in the moment of any child-centered ritual, to say, let's pause. Let's hold space for those who are struggling and pray for them, that they too get the answers to the prayers that they are asking for, and that we as a community stand with them. And that we recognize that 1 in 6, according to WHO, are struggling with infertility. And that's a huge number to just pause in and sit with that reality.
And I know specifically, and I'll just speak personally, that prayer that you're speaking about is read in my synagogue on Simchas Torah, which is the holiday that we celebrate the giving of the Torah, and the dancing and the completion of the Torah cycle, actually. And there is a specific point in the service, and Rabbi Glickman, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. There's a specific point in the service where all of the children of that congregation gather under this massive tallis, and it's meant to be this specific blessing. It's called Kol Hana'arim, the voices of all of the young ones. And it's meant to be a specific blessing for all of the children that are in that congregation. And for me personally, as someone who has dealt with many years of secondary infertility and many losses, I often had to run out of my synagogue during that time because it was so overwhelming, or I would just basically be hysterically crying in the corner and hope that no one would see me. But now our rabbis have included that fertility prayer that Yesh Tikva has developed, and we say that prayer right before all of the children rush up. There's a lot of like hubbub and noise during the day, and it's a crazy time in the synagogue, and he quiets everyone down. He makes everyone sit, and he reads the prayer both in Hebrew and in English. And it's just a beautiful moment of reflection. It doesn't mean that I don't hysterically cry when I see all the kids go up, even now, but it is this beautiful ritual. Rabbi Glickman, you were also mentioning some rituals. I know there are many different resources. One of our sponsors here today is Ritual Well, which is just an absolute treasure trove of all different kinds of resources and rituals for people who are seeking that. Are there some others that you're thinking of that have been meaningful for you or meaningful for any of your congregants?
No, I think that Ritual Well, I agree, is a great resource. And, it's so idiosyncratic as to what will speak to different people. And I would say to just be open in talking to your clergy or friends. There's nothing wrong with having a chavurah or a group of friends at a Shabbat dinner to share your pain with. And, we can learn a lot from other groups that have had a long history of support networks, of offering prayers in small group settings can be extremely, extremely powerful. But I would say to not give up on finding fresh ears and people who will listen to you. And, if your rabbi or counselor is not listening, first of all, I'm sorry. We're human like everybody else, and find someone else. Find a good friend, find a social worker, open up to another friend. Do they have a friend who's going through a similar struggle? Because it can really be helpful to share it with somebody else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So now I'm going to turn to our last question in this panel, which is really talking about the financial let's try that again. The financial challenges of any kind of fertility struggle, and specifically in the United States. I mean, we had Rachi Hain and Michal Rones and Karen Friedman from Israel who were speaking about how in Israel it's free to do, IVF treatments. Karen was mentioning that there's a woman that she knows that went through 17 rounds of IVF in Israel because it's free. But here in America and in many, many, many other spaces in the world, it is not free. And the question is, and I'm turning to you, Alana, first, because you have specifically with Jewish Fertility Foundation, you've specifically created a sustainable communal model for financially giving to people who are needing those resources. And I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about that model. And then Rabbi Glickman, we're going to come to you and hear about Priya's model. But what is the communal responsibility here in terms of taking care of people and helping them out financially?
So I don't think it's siloed. I would never say that, just handing money over to somebody who's experiencing infertility is the best solution. I thought it was when I started it. And then I quickly learned that supporting somebody emotionally and giving them the educational tools are literally equally as important. But I think, the first few years of trying to raise money to give money feels very different than it does today. Today, it's not just, going to like friends and family and begging and pleading and sharing my own personal story. Now it really is the community. It is America as a whole. It is, large funders now who are actually feeling the responsibility. And also it's not just about raising the money to give out the money to those who have needs-based, but it's also understanding how to go beyond just the fertility grant itself. What are other ways you can help the individual through discounted medication, through negotiating discounts with partners at fertility clinics, which is pretty substantial, through working with local Hebrew free loan associations. Those are huge opportunities that many, many communities offer. Through, our partner, J-Screen, we don't want to just make babies and give money to make babies. We want to make healthy babies. It's really working collaboratively with so many amazing existing organizations to say, hey, we could do this, we can go really, really deep with an individual and help them financially significantly if we can work together and partner together.
Amazing. And your model has been incredibly successful, and you have how many different branches right now? And
Sure.
I know you're poised to open many more.
Yeah, so we're currently in 7 locations, and we're hoping to open up 1 to 3 new locations annually. And we just got a big grant to offer specifically any new location we open, we get $50,000 from the Zalek Foundation, specifically for fertility grants.
Incredible.
Money equals babies. So
Incredible.
they get that, and it's really important.
Incredible. Rabbi Glickman, tell us about Priya. How was Priya founded? How was it started? I know that it's personal for you. It's personal for you and your wife. Tell us a little bit.
Absolutely. So Elena and I have struggled with secondary infertility, both for child number 2 and child number 3. One was unknown female infertility, and one was unknown mysterious male infertility, and the doctors were not able to give definitive help or answers for either, and we were, thank God, able to have children. And it was really a pay it forward to God that we were able to have children, and we wanted others to. And during that struggle, I'm not only a rabbi, we're not only a rabbinic family, we're also members of a community. And there was another rabbi in the city who, from his discretionary fund, gave us some financial assistance to be able to get medication. And it was like in the same way that getting a kid to a summer camp, where sometimes even a small gift can get a family over a financial hump. to be able to get the help and the treatment they need. But more than that, we felt seen, we felt heard, and we felt supported and loved. And so that's why we created TRIA, which means to be fruitful. We started a site in Dallas, and then when we moved to Kansas City, we started another site in Kansas City. In Dallas, it was originally part of the Dallas Jewish Community Foundation, and now it's part of the Jewish Family Services. And here in Kansas City, it's part of Jewish Family Services. And like Ilana said, it really is because of a multi-agency collaboration, grants from foundations, grants from family foundations, also from annual fundraising and personal solicitation. And I personally think that this needs to be a front burner issue for the entire national Jewish community. We're not going to have kids at summer camps if we don't have kids. I mean, it's plain and simple. And this is not tzedakah. This is an investment in our future. And, you know, if you give someone a grant for $50,000 for to be able to have a child, that child, as I well know, is going to cost much more than $50,000 in Jewish educational experiences during their first 18 years. So the Jewish community will be getting all of that money back, just going to different places. It's going to go to day schools, religious schools, synagogue dues, camp tuition, all of these different places. All of that money will come back, and then some. And I think that we need to catch up with the state of Israel. We have, I look at the state of Israel is a pro-natalist country. They are in favor of Jews having babies. And I think that if the Jewish community is in favor of reproductive choice, this is an aspect of reproductive choice. It's families that want to choose to have babies.
I love it. I love it. He's absolutely right. We are not in that state. We are not in that country at the moment, and we have a very different model, but things can change. Things can change. I want to leave the three of you with the opportunity to just share for 30 seconds one thing that you'd like to tell the people listening today. What do you want them to know about you, about your work, about the kinds of things that you think about, the kinds of things that keep you up at night? What do you want them to know? Gila, I'm coming to you first.
I think the thing I would genuinely want people to know is that we care very deeply. Each person, each story resonates, matters, and they aren't alone. It feels a lot of times like you're the one in the 1 in 6, and stepping out and being able to say that there is a community of 1 in 6 to lean into. And that looks different for everybody. For some people, that looks like sharing their stories publicly. And for other people, it's being able to find that one person that they feel comfortable leaning into, and that finding whoever that one person or large community is for them is game changer. I know it was for me, and I hope that each 1 in 6 does find that and knows that there are so many of us here holding space and creating space for them.
Beautiful. Rabbi Glickman.
I would just say to not be afraid to give voice to the pain. The Israelites weren't freed from Egypt until we collectively groaned and cried out. And it was that groaning and crying out that was the catalyst for God to take us out of the slavery of Egypt. And I think that we need to cry out, and that's what's going to have others hear our cry.
I love that. I love that. We need all of our voices. And that's exactly what this summit is doing here, bringing together so many voices to be able to cry. Alana.
All right, mine's a little different. I'm very, I think throughout my entire journey of trying to have children, I was always thinking, okay, if this doesn't work out, what's the next step? If this doesn't work out, what's the next step? And I wish somebody told me about embryo donation way earlier. That's how I had my third child. I'm very passionate about that today, but why did I not know that that was an option for so many years? So if there's anybody here who would like to learn a little bit more about my little cute 4-year-old and how I got him, I am always happy to talk about that.
Amazing. And I think also, just in going back for a second to the financial conversation, I think that we would be really remiss without acknowledging the work of other organizations that really do tremendous work in that space. Bonei Olam does tremendous work, and there are many others that in all over the world who specifically offer grants. And we can help provide some of those resources afterwards if people reach out to us. And one special shout out also to the Kansas City representative of Priya, Molly Hess. Also, I could not let this moment pass without mentioning her as well. Okay, Gila, Alana, Rabbi Glickman, thank you so much. I'd like to take this moment and thank our gold sponsors before we move on to our second panel. Our gold sponsors are CCRM, the Eden Center, or Merkaz Eden, Hadassah, Jewish Fertility Foundation, you just met Alana, JOMA, Jewish Orthodox Women's Medical Association, Mayim Chaim, OHEL, Stardust Jewish Fertility Foundation, you're going to meet Dr. Alex Peyser in 1 second, and Taharenu. So those are our gold sponsors. And now we are going to move into our second panel. I am thrilled to bring on Reva Judas, who is the founder and director of Nechama Comfort, Dr. Alex Peyser, who is the co-founder of Stardust Jewish Fertility Foundation, and Justine Saidman, who is the CEO of the Australian Jewish Fertility Network. And this next panel is all about, why is the rabbi asking when I'm having kids? It's our sensitivity training for clergy and lay leaders. And so, Justine, you knew that I was coming to you first because you know that the title of this panel comes from the story that you told me when we were doing our pre-summit meetings. So you must share that story here. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Amy. So we participated in Yesh Tikva's Global Infertility Shabbat. We do it every year. And in the lead up to that program, one of my phenomenal team members, who's the head of community and support, went around to meet with every single rabbi from every denomination in Sydney. To tell them about the importance of sensitivity around infertility, to tell them about this global awareness Shabbat that was coming up, to give them some ideas of how they could include something about infertility in when they talked in the synagogue, either on Friday night or Saturday morning, and to give them an opportunity to participate. And when we did our debrief after all of these different meetings that this colleague of mine had, the overwhelming response from these rabbis was, wow, I had never thought about the need to be sensitive. I'd never considered that maybe asking people who might have gotten married in the last year or two when they might be having children, or whether, you know, what was going on, or why so long between number one and number two. And we were just stunned that there was no consideration given to this. And we had two phenomenal things occur as a direct result of this round of talking to all these rabbis. Number one was that one rabbi went straight away to a couple that he knew who were struggling with infertility and referred them to us. And within 48 hours, we'd given them a financial grant to support them with their next round of IVF. And the second thing that happened was one of the rabbis raised infertility and the work that we do at his bride and groom class, which just so happened to be in the next few days after he had had this conversation with us. And as a result of that, a couple who were yet to get married, who knew they already had an infertility issue, came to us for support. And so I think just being aware is so profound, and it changed the lives of so many people. We had never thought about it. It had never occurred to us that rabbis would not be sensitive around this topic. And Reva, I know this is something you have quite a bit of experience in, but yeah, so the topic for this session today comes from this conversation that I shared with Amy.
Yes, yes. And Reva, so now I'm going to come to you and your lens. First of all, Justine, yes. And like I couldn't get that story out of my head. And I knew we had to share it here because it really demonstrates the disparity of what we think people ought to know versus what they actually know or what they actually put into practice. And that's really what the purpose of this piece of the summit is about today. So Reva, now back to you. Your work in Nechama Comfort specifically deals with pregnancy loss and infant loss. It is not in the infertility space, is it? It's in the loss space. And I know in the loss space, there have been lots of different choices and decisions that were not even given to parents in years past in terms of like whether they could bury a child depending on how old that baby was or not, whether they could name the baby, whether they could hold the baby, whether they could spend time with the baby, whether they could celebrate a yard site, whether they could sit Shiva. And some of that language, some of those practices, some of those rituals have changed, but there are still many people sort of in the old school and those old ways who are still stuck in, let's call it the early 1900s and haven't come back into the modern day. And so I'm wondering specifically if you can share with us a little bit about the kind of training and the work that you do with rabbis and with clergy around these issues.
Okay, thank you. Yes, my head keeps shaking. So what I want to just have a different spin because unfortunately, my firstborn son passed away 36 years ago. So I've been in this community, I guess, one of the longest. And we have seen a lot of change for the positive, but we still have our work cut out for us. And really, I think that the practices of Judaism, or the rabbis, the clergy, in all denominations of Judaism, just followed the way of the world for so many years. In the secular world, not so long ago, there were no recognition. We didn't talk about anything. I mean, just May alone, mental health awareness. We're having this infertility summit. Today's Bereaved Mother's Day. I mean, it's amazing. So they just followed the path of what's best to do. If we don't talk about it, if we don't acknowledge it, then it didn't exist. And I was fortunate. My father is a rabbi. I can't say retired. And we were lucky because he was able to guide us 36 years ago to give our son Pesach a name, to bury him, to put up a headstone. And most of us today in this community or families experiencing that would say, well, of course, but that wasn't done. Because what this world thought about, just like in terms of the Holocaust or veterans, we didn't know the research of PTSD, but we do know now. And what we really try to share with families, but starting with the community leaders, the rabbis, the Rebbitzins, everybody involved, the first people, the chaplains, the social workers at the hospital to understand that families have choices. And it's so important for the couple to make that choice. Even if they feel that was the wrong choice to make, they made it. And research and therapies and professionals from the mental health world will tell you how important that is. And there is no Jewish law telling us what to do with a baby that passes away under 30 days. And because of that, we in the Jewish community have the choices. We want the families to know that they can choose the name of their baby or not. And I know at Nechama Comfort, we offer guidance and support to help them with that choice. They can have their babies buried. And now with the advancement of medical technology, we even are able to bury a baby, let's say that they call in the medical world a fetal demise after a miscarriage. The funeral homes, we help funeral home directors. I advise any community members, rabbis listening to go back to your funeral homes. Simple things, Make sure that there's a coffin available for that size. Make sure, where's the baby going to be buried? Is there a spot in the cemetery? Going back to what we were talking about before, financial burden. So many of these couples, they don't have family plots. They don't even, we couldn't even imagine thinking about this. So let's help with the financial burden as well. But so be prepared. The couple can choose where the baby's buried. There, as we had talked about, and we could share many rituals. There are so many different ways that the parents could participate in the funeral, or you as the clergy or the friend or the family member, you may be the one that they said, can you go please and help us bury the baby? I know I've gone personally. We prepare the baby, there's preparation, maybe not a formal tahara, but the couple so appreciate that. And we could share the information. And I think that's what we need to get down. The first word is choices, informed choices.
Definitely. I think all of those things, it's important for people to know that, and for both the lay leaders, for community members, and for clergy to know that there are choices, there are options, and to reach out to organizations if you don't know, if you've never learned it when you were in rabbinical school, if you never learned it when you were going through your training. There are organizations out there like Nechama Comfort and others that can help guide you to help give you the best possible answers to your congregants. Dr. Peyser, Alex, I want to come to you now from the medical angle, because there are so many pieces about the medical story. You know, you yourself, you are a reproductive endocrinology fellow, you're in your third year, but you also have had your own fertility story. So you know both sides. And I just have to share with you this story from this woman who wrote to us recently. She said that she was a reporter and she was interviewing a pediatrician on a topic related to kids' health. And the doctor was frustrated by her line of questioning and said, "Do you have kids?" And she said, "No, not yet." And he said, "Oh yeah, I can tell." I mean, right? Like, these are the kinds of things that are just not appropriate and really deeply upsetting for anyone, but specifically people who are going through some kind of fertility challenge. And I'll even say, I'll go one step further and say that, you know, we've also heard many stories about, for people in more religious sects who, generally speaking, in their communities, they bust out, so to speak, babies year after year after year. When one of those women or one of those families comes in after a loss, the doctors, I've heard the stories, the doctors are often so callous and they'll be like, "Oh, don't worry, you'll be back here next year with another." Like, what can we do? What do you say? And you yourself are in training now, and you see both sides of this. What do you say to people? How do you help advise the medical community, the mental health community, people who are there, who are holding people in pain, literally giving them mental health help? How do you advise them?
So I think we have a lot of work to do, but I think it starts here with these organizations that exist. We are going to the rabbis, we're going to the community leaders to tell them about these organizations so that they can share with their community members. But we need to do that also for the other leaders, the doctors, the mental health providers. We need to tell them that these organizations exist. So I know that when I see, God forbid, a patient with pregnancy loss, I could send them to Nechama Comfort. I know that, but not that many physicians know that and know that we exist. So I think we need to get out there, all of these organizations, and make sure the physicians have the list, have the Rolodex, so they know where they can send each, specific patient that comes to them for any specific problem, whether it's mental health, whether it's financial help, we can send them and get them appropriate help. But we definitely have a lot of work to do with that.
A lot. Justine, what should, what should these community leaders, these clergy, what should they be saying? How can they make it better? And I'm going to even go further, and I'm asking you this, and I'm going to ask everyone else also, should they say anything? Right? I mean, some of the fear I know that I've heard from people who are in positions of power, whatever it is, where they think that someone might be struggling because, it's been X number of years since they've been married and they don't have any kids, or they see that age gap between the first and the second, or however, between how many kids they would ordinarily have assumed that someone would have had children more frequently. The question is, what can you do? How can you make it better? Should you make assumptions? Should you say anything?
So it's a great question. I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all answer. And I think the most important thing that anyone in a community leadership position can do, whether they're a rabbi or a teacher or a CEO or a leader of any organization, is to listen to the people that are their congregants, for want of a better word, or their clients, or the people coming to their organization for support, and to actually listen to what those people are saying, not just with their words, but with their behaviors and the way they communicate and their practice and how they're living. And if you tune in on that deeper level, then you will know if it's okay to ask. And sometimes it's okay to even say, look, I don't want to be insensitive, but is everything okay with you guys? If you're having any issues, I'm here. Like, I think it's okay to say that without being presumptuous, without being rude, without being insensitive, to say it in a private way, to when you have an opportunity, if you feel that it is right. But if you are not tuned in, if you are thinking big picture about Simchat Torah and what's coming up, and you're not focused on the individual, you will miss the cue. And so it's incumbent upon all of us as Jews, looking after our fellow Jews, to listen for those cues and to know when is it. And Alex, you would know this as a doctor, like you have to read between the lines, like what is actually being said in a conversation. And it's a dance. When do you step forward and offer your hand of help? And when do you step back and just say, you're not alone, I'm here, and I'm here no matter what you need. And I will not judge you. I will, for those of us who have children, I say to my kids all the time, I will love you no matter what. I'm here for you no matter what. You just have to come and talk to me. And I think, as certainly for me, as running an organization like I do, that is the key, to really tune in and listen and understand and ensure that nobody feels alone. They will come to you. And I think the flip side is true as well. If you're the person who's experiencing a loss, whatever kind of loss that is, whether it's the loss of a parent, the loss of a friend, the loss of a baby, whether you're going through infertility, it is okay to also speak up and say what you need. We shouldn't judge people for saying what they need. I need space. I need someone to provide me with meals. I need a massage. I need someone to talk to. It is okay for you to go to your rabbi, or to go to your the head of the JCC or whatever the organization is, and say, I need a quiet room to sit at the moment, or I may be a bit emotional in the synagogue this weekend because I've just experienced a loss. So is there somewhere I can go if I feel like, I need to cry? Do you have tissues? Those kind of things. I think it comes from both sides. And I think part of the panel before, where we talked about creating safe spaces, that's exactly what it is. You want to make space for everybody to feel as though they belong, to feel as though that their story is equally valued by the community, whether that story includes children or doesn't. And by being an inclusive community means making space for all the voices in the choir of the Jewish people.
And I think that there is something very, very beautiful and very powerful about that. I actually wanted you to speak about, you had a woman who was requesting a mikvah for
Oh,
her.
okay. That's what you wanted me to talk about. Okay. All right. Thanks for the prompt. I should have gone back to the notes.
All good.
So, yeah, we had a woman who had tried everything. She was a secular woman. She happened to be, her partner was not Jewish, and she came to us. She was really desperate, and she said to us, "I will do anything. Like, what can I will really do anything. Like, do you think I should go to the mikveh?" And we said, "Sure, great idea. You know, like, it's a great opportunity. Go and make a space for yourself at the mikveh. We will organize it." And we tried to organize it. And the response that we received from the mikveh, one particular mikveh, was, well, if her partner is not Jewish, she doesn't really need to go to the mikveh. And if she isn't going to go to the mikveh anyway, in a proper way where she counts appropriately and checks appropriately and does all these things, then we can't really accommodate her. And that for me and for my team was pretty devastating, because here you had someone who wanted to take a step in to a religious space and was denied that opportunity. And, you know, I still don't have a solution. I know Reva has made some suggestions, which I thought were really great suggestions, but I don't have a solution for how we make that space for people who want it.
I think there is, you know, in America, this is what I had mentioned previously. One of our sponsors, Mayim Chaim, has a Living Waters initiative where they have an organization of an outreach of different mikvaot that can be used all over the world, that partner with them to give people those kinds of experiences. And they are one of our sponsors, and we will give everybody those resources afterwards. So anyone who is interested in that kind of experience, you will have those resources in your inbox by tomorrow evening. But Dr. Peyser, Alex, I wanted to come back to you and ask you, you know, in the medical realm and in your own personal life, also in all of the different pieces that you needed to do to build your family, were there places and spaces that felt more meaningful to you? That were there rituals that you leaned on, or you in your role at Stardust that you advise people to lean on, because you have a very specific role. You are one that you are the co-founder there, and many people come to you with their specific challenges, also knowing that you are a reproductive endocrinologist. Can you give us a little bit of an insight into there as well?
Yeah. So what's interesting is, I think just by sharing my story, starting Stardust by people who went through fertility themselves, sort of gave this openness for people to just come if they want and open and ask us questions. So that's where I leave it. I let people come to me. You know, I'm here for them. You know, they know I went through it. I want to help them. So I don't like to ask. I am open, and I feel like I'm leaving it open for them to ask me. And once they do, you know, I embrace it, and it's such a wonderful thing. In terms of me personally, and just people struggling and rituals in general, you know, we're talking about rituals that may help, but I want to spin it and focus on rituals that we do that may be upsetting or triggering to our common rituals, that triggering to those who are struggling. So, you know, for example, during a bris, you know, there's a custom, a tradition for people that don't have children, for them to bring in the baby. And multiple times they'll be asked, "Oh, do you want to bring in the baby? It's a segula, it's a merit, you know, it'll help you." But this is very public. It's very triggering. You know, this is something we need to work on within our community, within our community leaders, that I think we could work on in general. But yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are definitely other times, we mentioned in the past panel where all the gathering of all of the kids and that very public ritual and how difficult it can be. But there are ways to make these spaces and these opportunities a little bit easier. Reva, I want to close off with you because I know that so much of the work that you do in grief, in loss, in death, let's call it, that there are very few laws, there are very few halachos, Jewish law, that really mandate the kinds of things that can be done and can't be done. That so many of these rituals are just, they're rituals. They're things that some people do. They're things that other people do. Some people don't do. Some people, I mean, it's really a whole amalgam of different pieces. And I know that you talk a lot about speaking to people on their level, where they are, and giving them, as you said previously here, the choices about how there's no wrong or right thing to do. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to mention, because what happens usually when I speak at these programs is I'll have people reach out. So if anybody's listening or anybody goes off and speaks to their communities, which I hope about the summit, that it's never too late. So any of these rituals that I'm going to mention in a second, or other resources, so many times that we find families, couples, women that will say, oh, I lost my child 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago. I never had a chance. So it's never too late. And you can reach out and create your ritual, your choice, what you're going to do, your way that you're going to remember your child. It's the child that lives in your hopes and dreams that we help the couples, we guide them. How are they going to put this child into their life and move through it? And like you said, there are no rules, so everything is customs. So I have women that reached out when they were 70, 80 years old and created a new part of their lives, of their families. And exactly, for example, what we do as a people, we come together, we have the Jewish memorial prayer, the Yizkor. If that's something that you choose to do, that is fine. If you want to, many of us have a custom to light a Shabbat candle. And for our children, you can add a candle. Or I have friends and clients, they buy a candlestick, and that candlestick they don't light. Or we plant something that's going to grow every year to remind us of that child, or their piece of jewelry. Or sometimes it's just something inwardly, a special prayer or a poem or a song. Or that this child has become a part of your life just by talking to him or her. And that's why we encourage the couple to give the baby a name. It could be a nickname. It could be the real name. Not just call it the baby. This is the identity. And if you're grieving this child and you're recognizing the child, there is so much to do. The child is not going to live in your family the way that you had planned. But there are so many things, and you could reach out to us at any time for so many ideas. We do things communal. For example, this Sunday is Mother's Day in America. And what we've said is embrace your children. Mother's Day is wonderful. We're not saying that we shouldn't celebrate it, but let's remember those families that aren't their mothers. Or for example, in my family, I've had 6 miscarriages. I have a child that passed away when he was 12 hours old. I have 4 living children and 8 grandchildren. So we will celebrate Mother's Day, but we're also going to go to the local cemetery where we have our babies from the Chama Comfort buried, and we're going to do some type of ceremony. So it's really putting it into your life, what speaks to you. And that's what's important. And I think for the community, for the clergy, to respect the choices of these couples, not to have the look, really? And even if you have that look, you have to deal with it. We tell our families, you don't have to make these people comfortable. Your family and friends and community have to understand. And we have come so long. We have a remembrance day for everything. Us in the Jewish community, needs to embrace these children as well, these couples, their families,
Absolutely.
and just to
Absolutely.
understand and be thoughtful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Alex and Justine, a few seconds of final words. What do you want to share with this audience? Alex, I'm coming to you first. Dr. Peyser.
We are here for you. We want to help you. We don't want you to struggle, and reach out, and we are here.
Justine.
You're not alone. And that goes for the rabbis themselves, for the CEOs, for the doctors, for the people experiencing infertility. You're not alone. Quite the contrary, you're part of the most phenomenal people in the world. You're part of the Jewish people. It's a gift. So you never need to feel alone.
Never, never. Thank you so much, Reva Judas, Dr. Alex Peyser, and Justine Saidman. I can't believe we're going to try to top all of that. But before I bring you our next set of phenomenal speakers, I must tell you about our silver sponsors. We have Extend Fertility, Fruitful, the organization that Chani Levertov, who was in our first panel in last session, that's the organization she runs in Arizona. We have Modern Jewish Couples, the National Bikor Cholim Conference, which I ran in concert with Rabbi David Balto, who runs the National Bikor Cholim Conference. He and I put together a perinatal law summit in February. So he is our partner there as well. We have Ritual Well, which we mentioned a number of times already this evening. Sviva, who was our fierce partner and partner in crime, so to speak, who helped us run the first Jewish Fertility Summit in 2021. Ariella, we miss you terribly. And the UJA. But now I want to turn to our final panel for this evening. We are on part 3, and I am thrilled to introduce you to Aliza Abrams Konig, Dr. Gail Miller, and Dr. Bill Petok. Our session now is called, as I'm reminding everyone, we started out this session talking about communities. Then we went into families, clergy, lay leaders, medical professionals, mental health professionals, sort of that intermediate layer. And now we're into the friends, the neighbors, the more close family members. And this session is all going to be about what to do, what to say, what not to do, what not to say. And so I want to start right off and ask all of you, and we're just going to go right down. Let's talk about those invasive, insensitive questions that people ask. And we know they like to ask a lot of invasive and insensitive questions. So my question is, how should people respond to them? Like, how do you even begin to respond when people have made you feel so unsettled? And what advice would you give to people who are trying to set new boundaries with the close people in their lives who feel like they should be part of your every possible move in regard to your fertility life, and you're not really so interested in that? So, Aliza, I'm coming to you first.
Thank you so much, Amy. I am a firm believer in telling somebody that the question they're asking is none of their business. We had a child via surrogacy, and which was a tremendous blessing. And I would say that the top 3 most obnoxious questions that I get is number 1 being, did you ever consider adoption, or why didn't you adopt? Number 2, are you going to have more children? Number 3, when are you going to move and buy a house? And number 4 is, it's amazing that he actually looks like your husband. And, people, first of all, There are lots of people who do surrogacy, like ourselves, who are able to have their child completely genetically theirs. And then there are people who use donor egg or donor sperm. And when you ask somebody, who does that child look like? You might be asking a question that is really triggering for somebody, because it could be that that's a donor egg or a donor sperm. And that's why that kid has blonde hair and nobody else in the family does. So I am very comfortable after many years of being asked inappropriate questions and saying, that's not your business. And also saying to somebody, I mean, I've said this to people, would you feel comfortable if I asked you that question? And just throwing it back on them. I joked about when you're going to buy a house. People often, we live in Riverdale, we live in an apartment, we rent, and people are always like, when are you buying your house? When are you going to come to the burbs? And what they don't understand is, first of all, nobody knows anybody's financial standing, right? And that's like nobody's business in general. But when I do a surrogacy journey, that's the same amount of money that it costs basically as a down payment on a house. So I invest my money in having children. Other people are able to invest their money in having homes. And it's so insensitive to ask that question, even if it's well-meaning, right? But people don't understand how they could be offending somebody with even a simple question. And I think that the other question that people often ask that I don't love when people do this is, does your son know? And my son is 4 years old. Like, how many deep intellectual conversations are you having with a 4-year-old, right? And again, these are things that I am his parent, and I'm going to have that conversation with him when he is ready and when we feel he is ready. So again, I have redirected those kind of comments and just said to people, like, that's just not a sensitive question to be asking.
Love it. I love all of it. I feel like I need to bottle that up and just like have it on like my phone so that anytime someone asks me an insensitive question, I just have those ready to spit back. But Dr. Miller, I know that you yourself have your own specific story. You talk a lot about the fact that you were unable to have children. So you are childless, not by choice. And I am sure you've gotten gazillions of comments over the years, and now you advise people on how to answer those kinds of questions. So how should people respond? How did you respond when people ask you these questions?
So I do think the best response, as Aliza said, is it's not your business. But I will be honest, it took me a long time to get comfortable saying that, right? Because these are incredibly personal questions. And when you think about it, like, having a child is not just one of the most personal decisions. It's one of the most, if not the most personal act. And people don't understand that. And they think it's okay, but they think it's rude for us to respond with, it's not your business. And so there are still times where I'm like, oh, this is not the right situation to say that in. So what I suggest is, there's no way to prepare an answer for every single question, because sometimes I still get questions and I'm like, never thought of that one, I still get shocked. But what I suggest are a general response of, that's personal, or it's just not something I want to talk about. But it's still something that's very difficult for many people to do, because again, it feels like you're being rude in response to this personal question. So I really recommend practicing ahead of time, because especially when you're in the moment, that adrenaline is going, you're triggered. You can't think of those responses, especially if you're not used to being forthcoming and saying, that's personal. So I recommend always to figure out what it is that you are comfortable with saying, and then practice it ahead of time. And sometimes it's starting in your head and then working up to just saying it out loud multiple times, and then speaking in front of a mirror, so that when those questions come up, you don't have to stop and think, and that trigger is not limiting your ability to reply.
I love that. And Dr. Petok, look, you as a incredibly seasoned mental health professional in the fertility space, and specifically also in the male infertility space, I'm just curious about, one, how do you think these questions differ for men? Do you think that men get asked these questions Do you think that men respond differently? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, thank you. I think, yes, men respond differently. We are not well trained in talking about how we feel. And frankly, if it's a male factor infertility issue, we're really not well trained in understanding reproductive health care. So when we are confronted with it, it's a huge shock, and with shock, you don't frequently talk very much. I like what Dr. Miller said, and I like what Aliza said, that there are some stock kinds of things. Practice obviously is very good. And coming up with things that are useful to say. For instance, I'm sure you are asking me in a well-intentioned way, but this is a very private and personal matter. And if I have something to let you know, I will. The other thing about, gee, he looks just like so-and-so. I'm reminded of the story that my mother used to tell when one of her relatives would say, Bill looks just like so-and-so, or he looks just like so-and-so. And my mother, of blessed memory, would say, he looks just like himself. And I thought that was a beautiful answer. It had nothing to do with fertility. It had everything to do with, why would you want to pin a child into some cubbyhole like that, especially when they're young? They're going to grow and become different. And, it's just the wrong thing to say. But I think what's important here is that people do not recognize that they're being incredibly insensitive, because usually they're people who had an incredibly easy time getting pregnant. And so it just seems automatic that you would too, which goes back to, we don't have really good information that's shared publicly. 1 in 6 is a very big number. It's even bigger if you are the one.
Correct. And so let me actually take that a step further and say, okay, we know, 1 in 6 means that 5 in 6 people are actually not having a hard time. And they are having pregnancies and they are having children. And it's that 1 in 6 that's not. And so we get these questions a lot. And I was supposed to have a baby, this idea of, well, what do I do if I know someone who's struggling, but I just found out that I'm pregnant? Like, how do you share good news with someone who is really having a hard time? And I think let me even, move that a little bit further along and say, specifically, in these big communal, either family events or communal, let's call it birthday parties, baby showers, bar mitzvahs, weddings, so to speak, Thanksgiving dinners, right? Where everybody's gathered around the table and, everybody's going around and saying, oh, and all these things happened to me, and I'm so grateful for this year, and I'm so grateful for that, and the kids are screaming this and that, and, and you're just like a fish out of water and don't know how to be in a space like that. So how, Dr. Petok, I'm coming to you first. So how would you suggest, one, that people share news about their pregnancies with people who know that they know that people are struggling? And then in general, just these big events, like, how do you manage these kinds of things?
Well, I think if you have a true friend, you say something early on. If you know that they're struggling, you say, listen, I don't know what my situation is going to be, but I do know something about yours. Tell me, how would you like me to handle a situation? Because you are my friend, you are my cousin, you are I want to be respectful of your space. I think the other thing that is important here is that it's possible to have two competing emotions at the same time. You're happy for someone else and you're incredibly sad for yourself. And I don't think you have to feel guilty about that. It's just, it stinks, but that's the way it is. There was a second part to your question, and I got wrapped up in it stinks.
No, just about the family events, communal events, how to make those spaces more inclusive.
Well, that's up to the people, I think, who run those communal events. What do you say at Thanksgiving when everybody's talking about how wonderful it is that they have children? If you have the will to say, I'm so grateful I'm here with all of you, you don't say, and I feel miserable that I don't have children, because but that's a private thing. Or, maybe the person who's leading the event and you say, gee, I'd really like you to be sensitive about the fact that we don't have family. And let's not make it all about that.
Definitely. Definitely. Dr. Miller, thoughts about any of those questions?
So I think I agree with Dr. Petok that, you speak to the host ahead of time, depending on your relationship.
Right.
There's certain hosts that may be one of those people who are going to keep pushing you with the questions. Or you just don't have that closeness, but they've invited you. I think finding an ally ahead of time that can step in and change the conversation, advocate for you, help you, take you to another room. So I think thinking ahead of time and who will be there to support me and how can I help them to help me is what I would suggest.
Definitely, definitely. And Aliza, I'm going to ask, what about the, news of new pregnancies? Back to this piece of the question. Inviting people to events with kids. Like, how do you generally approach that in your own life, or what do you suggest for people that you advise?
So it's funny, I had a friend that we were going to for the weekend for Shabbat, and she felt that she needed to text me in advance to tell me that her sister-in-law was going to be there too, and she was going to be expecting. And I actually got upset, not because I was jealous, but I was like, don't you know me good enough to know that I'm going to be happy for you, for her? Like, why are you assuming that I need to be told in advance? And then I realized, like, obviously I was dealing with something if I felt triggered by the fact that she was trying to be thoughtful. Personally, I am generally the kind of person that was always happy for other people when they told me that they had children. I have two younger sisters who were married and had children well before I did. And when people would say to me, like, I'm really sorry, I just want to let you know that we're expecting, I'd be like, please don't start that sentence off with, I'm sorry. Like, I am happy for you. I am sad for myself, but I also know what my situation is and the reason why I don't yet have children. I think that sometimes when people are trying to be sensitive, it almost makes that person feel worse because you're trying to be thoughtful and yet you're like, well, how, I have to think of the English word, but how nebuch, like how, pathetic, thank you. Do you think I am, that I can't handle being in the room? At the same time, though, I think that everybody has the autonomy to say, I'm not going to Thanksgiving this year. Like, I know that's really going to make my mom upset that I'm not going to be there, but for my mental health, I cannot be in that space. I cannot go to that family birthday party for my 2-year-old niece or whatever it is. And that's where I think we have to protect ourselves and say, I know everybody thinks they're going to be really sensitive, but this is hard for me and I can't be in that place right now because it'll set me back. My brother had offered and invited us to be the klater, to accompany his baby in at their son's bris. And at that time, I just decided, we are not going to take this honor. It's like having a neon light blinking. They're the ones without the baby. There's the one. And I just said no. Like, as maybe, other people were wondering why I didn't take the opportunity. For me and my husband, it was protecting ourselves by saying no. And I think people have to remember that they can say no to these kinds of things and protect themselves that way.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Can I add one thing? Sorry. I also, as Dr. Petok said, that, feeling the sadness and the happiness is normal. You can have different emotions, but also it's possible to not be able to share in that happiness. That is normal as well. But to recognize that maybe in that situation, there may be underlying anxiety and depression. Maybe it could be an indication of that. So to please reach out for help, but for others to recognize that if you don't go to something, to go to Thanksgiving or whatever, to please be understanding and not say, well, if I was in their shoes, I would go, I would find it in my heart to be able to. Until you're in someone's shoes, you don't know. And that person, you may want to go one day and the next day not be able to. So that is really something to not feel guilty about your emotions.
Yeah, just to echo, you want to protect yourself. And that's the most important thing to do.
Absolutely. And so let's take this one step further and let's talk about learning to thrive again. When someone has to accept their new reality, whatever that reality is, it may be different from what their expectations and what their hopes and dreams and aspirations were when they were thinking about building their family. And for some of us, having children, number one, or having biological children, number two, or carrying our own children, number three, might not ever be a reality. And so these people, these families, and some of you are here, obviously, you've had your expectations shattered. And I think that it's important. I wanted you to share a little bit more about what it feels like to be dealing with this new reality, and what advice could you give to someone who is adjusting to this new reality of learning to thrive again, saying, life did not exactly give me what I hoped for, but now I'm here and I'm moving towards something else. And Aliza, I'm going to come to you first because you have a very specific story. You are a person who got married a little bit later than you thought. You then discovered you had a chronic kidney disease. You ended up needing a kidney transplant. In that process, your whole family building situation just, went up the wazoo. And you had to rediscover what it meant for you to be able to have a baby. And for you, that was through a surrogate. And so this process of thinking, everything's going to be straight and narrow, and then all of a sudden you're out here in left field, is very common for so many different people who end up having to make choices they never thought they were going to do. Can you give us a window into it, the emotions that you experienced, how you got yourself through that, and what advice you would give to others?
Yeah. I think that I never gave up hope, because maybe it wasn't going to happen, but I just kept saying, like, when it happens. And that worked for me. It doesn't work for everybody. And I think I'm not calling you out in a way, Amy, but you had once asked me in a podcast that we did, you said, you got your happy ending. And I said, but did I? Right? I had envisioned myself having 4 children, 5 children, and I have 1 child. So yes, I love him with all my heart and I am so blessed, but that's not what I envisioned my family to look like. I never envisioned going through a kidney transplant, et cetera. So I think that for me, this is also dates pun intended, when I was single for a long time, I surrounded myself with really positive friends and an environment. I didn't hang out with my married friends. I hung out with my single friends. And similarly, when I think even about who are my friends right now, I obviously have friends who have multiple children, but I would say the people I end up spending the most time with are people who have 1 or 2 children, because it just feels more comfortable for me. People say, why don't you move to the suburbs? And I say, because for me to be at a Shabbat meal with 4 or 5 children in a family and see their Honda Odyssey in the driveway, that hurts for me. So instead, I live in a community where it's not that everybody has multiple children, and I don't have to be judged on, what car I drive, and I'm not, doing 27 carpools, or even coming into that and being at a very different stage, right? I have friends who are making bar mitzvahs now, and my son is 4. And again, it doesn't mean I don't like my friends and I don't want to associate with them, but I have to focus on where I feel my best. And so I really think that it's about finding those things in life that make you happy and make you feel good about yourself. I traveled a lot with my husband before we had children. Thank God we had the funding to do that. And we filled our time in different ways. And I think that that's, for us, how we stayed positive throughout it. And we didn't wallow in our sadness. We really tried to fill our time in other ways and think about what would be one day. But I do think about it all the time, still, it's just, I won't have, all those children and all those grandchildren the way that even my sisters will, who have multiple children, who I love, to death. But it's about just focusing on what I do have and not what I don't have. And that's what helps me get through it.
I love that. I love that. All right. We can, that's the piece to focus on, right? That's the positive spin of the focus on the have, not the have-nots. Dr. Miller, I'm coming to you as someone who is in this space, this childless, not by choice space. This is not the way you thought your life would turn out. You are a maternal fetal medicine doctor by training. You spend your days taking care of babies, and your life didn't turn out to be in a space where you are able to take care of your own baby. You're taking care of others. Can you walk us through those emotions, the grief and the pain, and then what led you to develop this business, develop this outlook of, I now need to channel this and move that towards trying to help others and guide others?
Sure. I think so. The acceptance is really it's a misunderstood word or concept, because we often think, and I did as well, by accepting this means this is what I want, or I'm being disloyal to the child that I dreamed of, or the children that I dreamed of. And so the first step is recognizing that acceptance is simply stating your reality. I use the word simply, but it's not so simple, because there's a lot of emotions that go into this. And the first is to recognize because there's such a focus in this world about, stay positive, which is important and is wonderful, but we feel then guilty for the uncomfortable emotions, for the negative emotions, and we try to push them away. And that actually is more harmful, because they don't go away. They come out in ways that probably aren't in alignment with how you want to live. Maybe it's overeating, it's gambling, over binging, whatever. But so I think it's so important to recognize that your emotions, all of them, are valid. You will often be told to get over it, that you can't miss something you never had. Well, in fact, you can. So I also start with recognizing this is a loss, but you don't have to internalize what others are telling you. And so for me, it was actually a photo that popped up in my email. Today, these are the memories from however many years ago it was. And it was a photo of me, and I looked so happy in it that I sat there and I didn't recognize myself in this photo. And then it dawned on me, like, that photo was from before the time where I finally realized I wasn't going to become a mom. It was that really it dawned on me, I absolutely have to change my focus in life from what I don't have to what I do have. And so that was just a huge change for me in terms of working on my journey to accept this. And then also to understand, even when I accept this, I have triggers. There are, like everyone else, when you have a loss, whatever it is, there will be times when you feel fine and then it hits you. So I did actually worked with a therapist and a coach. Both were wonderful. Neither one was childless, not by choice. In fact, my therapist, who I love, said to me, well, I had a high-risk pregnancy, so I understand what you're going through. And I thought, no, you don't. I know you grieve because you had a high-risk pregnancy, and that is a loss as well, but it's a different situation. So no, you don't understand what I'm going through. And at the time, I realized, I looked around and I put this, Googled, what do I do when I can't have a child, and this term came up, childless not by choice, that I had never heard of. And that was when I realized I need to focus on, this is what I need to do. My focus has always been about helping women. And that's when I realized I need to become a life coach. I need to get this training and then use that, because that actually is what helped me the most, was my life coaching experience. And then I need to help other women to get to this point where I realize I have a wonderful life. It's very different than what I wanted it to be, but it is still wonderful. And you find outlets. For me, I find other ways to mother, if you will. And so you find a different purpose in life. It's not the same, but it's still very good. And you can still have a wonderful life.
Beautiful. I am incredibly inspired by both of your stories, I want to wrap up by offering the classic question to each of you in the, what can you do? What can you say when you know that someone is struggling, or when you may think you're not sure, but there are very classic things that we know that we're supposed to do. And all of us in this business, so to speak, know them. And we know that there are very classic things that we know that we are not supposed to do. So Dr. Petok, I'm going to come to you first as someone who works with so many of these individuals and couples, who counsels them, who walks them through to how to advocate for themselves with their friends and family. What do you say to them? What kind of things do you give them, advice do you give them in order to make their interpersonal relationships feel a little bit easier?
The first thing I do is I want to acknowledge the fact that their loss stinks. There isn't any way around it, and it would be foolish to say, I know how you feel, because I can't. And I think that's really important. You mentioned men before, and one of the classic things that men do as coping strategies is we deny and we avoid, which is really not a great way about doing things. And it's contrary to what typically our wives do, which is to talk with us. And so we, as men, probably a good idea to learn to say, it does hurt. And that hurt doesn't go away, but time grows around it. A loss is a loss, and it's never not a loss. But what Dr. Miller was saying about looking at things which are good in her life, the things that you do to enjoy your life, I think those add to it. Loss is still there. There'll be a trigger that reminds you, and don't be afraid of that. That's an important part of your life. I think, there are people that you will be able to share this with, and there are people that you will not. Find those that you can, who you trust and who trust you, and share it with them, and they will keep it. It's in some ways a gift to be able to share that, especially if you're a guy. And it's another guy that you can trust, because we don't do that very often or very well. And then you find other things to give you satisfaction of a different type in your life. That's the advice I would give.
I love it. I love it all. Dr. Miller, your advice.
My advice, so are you asking for other people what to say and what not to say? My biggest piece of advice is not to give advice. Not to give advice. And I would also start with, don't put yourself in their shoes. Meaning, don't assume that if you were in their situation, this is what you would do or what you would want. So therefore, that's what you're going to do for them. Instead, the only question I would ever ask someone would be, how can I help? So don't ask what's going on. Why didn't you have children? Why didn't you have, why did you have to use a surrogate? Why did you adopt? It's none of your business. So rather than asking questions, anything other than how can I help, just don't ask the questions and don't give advice, because you are not in their shoes. And most likely they have gone through all the resources and they've heard all of these things. And it just really hurts so much more when someone is then giving you this advice. So stay away from that.
Yes, yes, yes. I feel like I need to shout that to the rooftops. Don't give advice. Don't give advice. I say that all day long on I Was Supposed to Have a Baby. Aliza, close us out here. What advice, and I just did it to myself, to you, would you give to the people who are in your shoes?
Yeah, I actually feel that if you want to be supportive to somebody, it's just to say, I'm here for you. That's it. And that gives me the opportunity to either say, thank you so much. You know what? Actually, I really want to share, or it's just, thank you. That means a lot to me. Because like you had asked the question initially, like maybe you think something's happening, maybe not. Like Dr. Miller just said, you have no idea what's happening behind closed doors. And probably people have done the research or have gone through every type of medical procedure they can. So just saying that you are there for them, and that's it, doesn't go into their business in a way that they don't want to. I personally, we were very private with our surrogacy journey. Our siblings knew, and our parents obviously knew. And my siblings didn't know when to ask or what to say. And I just said, I know you're curious and I appreciate that you care. When I have an update, I will update you. And that really empowered me to give them the information that I wanted to share, and not, they were constantly asking questions like, can I ask this? Can I not ask? Because that would also make me feel guilty or upset. And I think it's really about just keeping it simple and letting somebody come to you when they want to.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you all so much. Aliza Konig, Dr. Gail Miller, and Dr. Bill Petok. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Wow. Everyone, look at what we have been able to accomplish in a short 90 minutes. All right, it's a little bit more than 90 minutes time frame. It has been absolutely incredible to see how our community has evolved in terms of mental health support, financial support, inclusiveness, openness to discuss sensitive topics in a public forum and across ideological boundaries. And before you go, we have one quick question for you. Julia, if you can put that into the chat right now. If everyone can click on that Menti in the chat, we'd like for you to tell us, what blessing do you have for everyone here? Everyone who joined here today, right now on 8 p.m., everyone who joined at 12 p.m., and all of the hundreds and hundreds. We've had over 600 registrants for this conference. We know that timing and other events have been difficult for people to attend live, but we know these people are eager to see the recordings, and we want people to know that all of you are thinking about them. So if you can take a moment before you go and to add in some things into this Menti so that people can feel how much you love them, that would be incredibly meaningful. This conference, this summit could not have been done without all of our incredible sponsors, and we are so grateful to them. I want to lastly share our summit's friends: Bamidbar, Base, CCAR, Honeymoon Israel, JQY, JScreen, One Table, Our Love Continues, RMA, Seeds of Hope, Tribe 12, Union for Reform Judaism, and Women of Reform Judaism. Thank you again to all of our phenomenal speakers for bringing your expertise into this room, into this space, into this field where these types of support were still relatively uncommon until recently. We could not have done this without you. We look forward to continuing all kinds of conversations with you at I Was Supposed to Have a Baby. Our mission is to utilize social platforms via Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook to support all Jewish individuals and families struggling to have a child. We provide a warm and nurturing space for those going through infertility, pregnancy loss, infant loss, surrogacy, or adoption, in addition to connecting them to resources in the Jewish community at large, just like we did here in this space. We have an entire community of people who are all yearning for parenthood, and no one should have to suffer alone. So please join us at I Was Supposed to Have a Baby on Instagram and www.iwassupposedtohaveababy.org. We are so grateful that you spent this time with us. If you were not able to watch the entire program, don't worry, you are getting recordings in your inbox tomorrow evening. Thank you all again for being here. We are so grateful.